Dr. Kahn, once again. Thanks a lot for agreeing to talk to me on my podcast.
I'm delighted and inspired by young people wanting to know from old people like me.
Well, wouldn't say that you're a very, like a particularly old man, but from wise people, let's say, because, we
I'll,
young people, what do we know?
I appreciate I'll call it a compliment, and
Well,
I'm in my early 60s, and most days feel very, very young. But thank you.
so how do you keep yourself fit and young? Because like early 60s is such a peculiar age where for most people health starts deteriorating very quickly, and it's oftentimes it's pretty sad to watch when you have like a close family member, for example, that's hitting early 50s, early 60s, and everything starts going south, which is not pleasant to watch.
Yeah, it's never one thing, it's everything and everything almost every day, and it's a lot. So I mean, in the last 10 years, I've really focused on 7 to 8 hours of sleep. I used to wake up at 4 a.m., go to the gym,
Yeah.
and be at the hospital at 5:45, 6 a.m. and start going. I was able to adjust my schedule 8 to 10 years ago. And one, you can't sleep 7 hours if you don't make 7 hours in bed. And two, I do all the things you read on any article. Avoid the bright lights, avoid food, caffeine, and alcohol for a few hours before bed. I take a number of nutraceutical supplements, usually a low dose melatonin, some magnesium, a little CBD hemp oil, which in the United States is easily obtained anywhere without prescription.
Yeah.
Sometimes a couple of herbs, lemon balm, and the rest. And it might seem like a lot, but there's a lot of challenges to sleeping well between just the pace of the world, the pandemic lockdown. Some people think Wi-Fi has been a factor. Ambient light. So I sleep. I work out every day, but it could be 15 to 30 minutes and sometimes 15 minutes on the week. And then, I try and amp it up a bit Friday through Sunday, getting closer to an hour. But my number one goal is, aerobic and strength, but not hurt myself. I overdid it a few weeks ago. My right shoulder's a little sore from a bit more weight. And it slows you down. So there's
look, that's part of the process, right? When you lift heavy and when you work out, then that's all part of it. Me as an athlete, I'm well familiar with this whole injury stuff and this the tendency to overdo exercise. That's a pretty easy one.
The macho gets in the way of the brain. I do a 9-minute yoga flow every morning.
Nice.
It's largely core and breathing. It's called the 5 Tibetan Rites, RITES, that sort of considered an ancient yoga flow. You don't need a class, you don't need music, you don't need an instructor, but it's so core and low back strengthening. And there's at least a rumor that it's an anti-aging longevity practice. That's some books that have been written in the last few decades, but one can question the science behind that. But anytime you focus on flexibility, balance, core, breath, you probably are doing anti-aging. And then I'd say the last thing would be food, because I've been vegan, but healthy, whole food vegan for over 40 years, since my late teens. I think I'm on my 45th, 46th year of not eating any animal products. I'm not in the protein deficiency ICU. I do believe you're a better whole food eater if you supplement. So I take algae omega-3, of course, B12, vitamin D. I don't make apologies for that. I think if we're going to avoid animal foods, we need to fill a couple gaps with vitamins. And if we're eating only animal foods, we probably ought to plan our bypass surgery and our heart stent. They both have pros and cons. So
right.
And I work a lot. But I enjoy what I do. So that's my life with a wife with 3 grown kids. They're all married, 1 grandkid, 3 dogs. Not a lot of travel since the pandemic hit. I used to travel a lot. Pretty much a homebody and an office body now.
Yeah. Since the pandemic hit, many things have changed, as we all know. So that's been quite a challenge for many people. But anyways, you mentioned a few very important pillars, I think. And as far as I can tell, these are the most important things to focus on, which are like sleep. And I really like that you mentioned sleep as the first thing. I don't know if there was a particular order to these things you just explained, but I don't know. As far as I can tell, people oftentimes hyper focus on one thing, say nutrition, for example. They talk about nothing else but food and nutrition. And if that happens at the expense of sleep, let's say, or they get more stressed, then well, I think that could potentially offset the benefits someone might gain from nutrition. So I think it's very important to focus on the things you just explained, especially like the sleep factor, because it's a huge one. When we're young, like me, I maybe don't feel a huge difference whether I sleep 6 or 8 hours, even if it happens to be for an extended period of time. But I truly believe it's a huge thing that most people don't focus enough on.
I agree. And, it's that classic, it's a tension. Do I get up early to go to the gym for an hour? Or do I get the extra hour's sleep and cut my workout to 20 to 30 minutes? I mean, I'm not aware of a large randomized study that's asked that question. And I think when you're younger, you can tolerate the shorter sleep. You get down to 3 to 4 hours, you're going to feel suboptimal. There's plenty of science.
Sure.
Your physical and your cognitive abilities drop quickly with one. There's just a couple of interesting statistics, but you can go a long time without food, you can go days without water, but within 1 or 2 nights of horrible or no sleep, you are really impaired in your functioning. The Guinness Book of World Record no longer allows people to put entries for the longest they've gone without sleep. It's an interesting. They'll let you jump out of an airplane 5 miles up without a parachute and try and record some kind of crazy feat.
Yeah.
But there were so many people trying to set the world record for staying awake, and some of them committed suicide.
Oh no!
That they banned, the competition and the awarding of a Guinness Book of World Record certificate. So the bottom line is, I spend a lot of time with my patients. The other thing is, as a medical doctor, there's a lot of sleep apnea. It goes hand in hand with a lot of obesity and overweight in all of the world. And it's easier now to do a test called a home sleep apnea test. Mm-hmm. It's quite inexpensive. I'm sure it's available all over the world. And it's allowed much easier diagnosis and therefore easier referral and therapy. Could be weight loss, could be obviously the CPAP, autopap mask, could be dental procedures, but I spend a lot of time with my patients to make sure, particularly those that are significantly overweight or atrial fibrillation or congestive failure, the likelihood of sleep apnea is so high, and until you address sleep and oxygenation and apnea, you don't really have a healthy patient.
Yeah, well, fair enough, and that's for sure. And even here in medical school, like as you might no, I'm also a medical student, and what we learned is basically about sleep apnea that is associated with a wide array of different conditions. The only thing is, and I find that, I don't know, it's some sort of excuse to not look further into to not connect the dots, let's say, that they claim that the arrow of causality is not quite well established yet. So they have no idea if sleep apnea causes people to become overweight and sick, or if it's the other way around. So what's your observation have been as far as sleep apnea is concerned? And
I think there are thin people that have central brain-based sleep apnea or some airway narrowing and issues. But the majority of the people, it's being significantly overweight or obese, and if you can get healthy, sustained weight loss, you will hear all the time, my snoring's gone. And if you do a repeat sleep study, you may see it tremendously better. So I think the root cause is the ultra-processed fast food, poor nutrition diet that is prevalent around the world, and the weight gain and the obesity. And then there's always been sleep apnea, but I think there's much more now.
Yeah.
Much more.
Certainly, it's one of those chronic conditions that has increased over time, and obviously, as is the case with so many conditions, the medical establishment has no idea what to do with it other than saying, well, it's associated with obesity and maybe losing weight is an option, or we put on a mask. But
Right.
this whole losing weight is like easier said than done, right?
Oh,
So
yes.
okay,
It's a
yep.
big challenge, trying to, yo-yo diets, crash diets
Mm,
are unhealthy and unsuccessful, and sustained weight loss is a challenge. There's some new medications, but they're just really a band-aid on the problem, but they do affect the physiology. But
right.
it's a,
What's your approach? What's your approach? I presume that, given that you're a cardiologist, that you encounter many patients that are indeed overweight or even obese, because that's what's heavily associated with heart disease and all these things, cardiovascular disease. Then the question is basically how what's the best way to approach weight loss? Since oftentimes you might even say diet and increase in movement and physical exercise is not always treating the root cause, because like what's the reason that the person is eating
right.
all these foods or not moving enough? Like what's your approach to that?
Right. Sometimes there's just a complete lack of education on nutrition. And the idea that eating a frozen pepperoni pizza is okay, is something we have to address. So everybody gets some education on what whole food eating is, what whole food plant-based eating is, what eating a rainbow diet with all the colors from the garden and the farmer's market and the produce department. There's quite a bit of data, even randomized double-blind data from a famous doctor in Washington, D.C., Dr. Neil Barnard,
Yeah.
that over the course of 4 months, 5 months, randomized studies, weight loss with a whole food, plant-based, relatively low added sugar, oil, salt diet is a healthy and sustained way to reverse insulin resistance, lose weight, and quite enjoyable and quite tasty. It's what I've done for years and years. I think I'd be significantly heavier. I'm not the skinniest human on the planet, but I think I'd be significantly heavier. Genetics play a role, and I have done my genetics, and I have a couple fat gene genetics, so I have to use a healthy diet as a backup. I mean, some people do, as you said, have serious psychological trauma,
Yeah.
PTSD.
Or
Food
maybe
is
sleep is a trigger, like sleep starts the whole
right.
vicious cycle, and then they move less and eat worse things, like unhealthy things, and then you have to fix the sleep first, and suddenly energy returns.
Yeah, it helps. But some people need psychological counseling and maybe coaching
Yeah.
because of they don't find food the problem, they find food the solution, very similar to alcohol. It's more of a food addiction, and the food manufacturers make all the processed, high calorie, low nutrition food so tasty and addictive that it really has to be almost handled like a food addiction. You can go cold turkey onto a water fast, cold turkey onto a juice fast, cold turkey onto a whole food plant-based, almost raw diet, and do very well. Some people need medical supervision. I look for nutritional deficiencies, vitamin D, omega-3, other vitamins. That's not a complete solution to the problem, but sometimes they're just nutritionally depleted, and again, vitamins may help.
Yeah.
There are some new prescription drugs. You're probably also seeing them in Germany, developed as diabetic drugs. Observed that people lose a lot of weight. They're peptide injections, usually once a week. The one that comes to mind particularly is called semaglutide, but there's a new one, and I probably will get it wrong, tirzepatide. We call it Mounjaro. It's the brand name. These are very expensive weekly medications that cause bigger weight loss, even in people that don't have diabetes. So one of the two I mentioned in the United States is now approved for weight loss without diabetes, although the insurance companies are making it challenging because it's very expensive. The other one is approved only for diabetes, but it probably will get an indication for weight loss. But it's only going to work as long as you take the medication. So taking a $15,000 a year medication for 10, 15, 20, 30 years is not very tenable. I mean, there's gastric
Yeah.
bypass surgery, there's various kinds of surgical approaches, and that is something I rarely recommend, but on occasion when somebody's exhausted the whole list. I'll just go circle back. You're in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Germany is one of the leading centers in the world of inpatient water fasting. And there are, wonderful centers that have treated tens of thousands of patients with 1 week, 2 week,
Yeah.
3 week, even longer water fasts, have to be medically supervised. And that can be approached to food addiction, to overcoming some of the trauma, the habits. It can be expensive, of course, but for some people to be significantly overweight, their quality of life and the expense associated with it is high, and it might be, worth it. Of course, when you come off a water fast and refeed, you have to transition on to an extremely healthy, and usually the recommendation is a whole food, largely raw diet,
Mm-hmm.
a plant-based diet. So you're ultimately going to get there. The calorie density of a salad is just a lot less than the calorie density of French fries, hamburger, and a steak.
Oh yeah.
So you're always better with a vegetable soup, a salad, a baked potato, and beans and rice. They're just nutritionally excellent, and calorie density is a lot less.
Okay, yeah. Well, water fast, that's maybe it works as some sort of reset, because
Right.
I don't know what happens when you're water fasting. Like obviously we know certain things about the physiology, but it's very complicated, I believe. Also maybe on a neurological, psychological level, things happen if you're just deprived of food for an extended period of time, and it seems to be helpful for people. Although there are
Yeah.
probably some caveats, like I don't think that you would necessarily recommend extended fasting for older people because of the my idea about older people is that the protein requirement is so unbelievably high because they have greater catabolism, they already tend to eat less, and they have worse protein absorption. So it's like when you then do a fast on top of that, I'm not sure if that's the best idea. Given
I,
that it's desirable to sustain muscle mass for as long as possible.
I want to stress that, I did say the word, these are inpatient observation medical personnel fasting centers. An elderly, frail person clearly should not be fasting, you know, on their own for any prolonged period at home, both for the safety and for what you mentioned. I'd have to add to the list. I'm sure you're aware again, there is a professor who splits his time between Milan, Italy, and Los Angeles, California, Dr. Walter Longo, PhD. Many would say maybe the world's leading nutrition scientist with amazing amount of research and publications over 30 years. So he has something that's a little gentler called the fasting mimicking diet. And after years of research, he found that first in animals, but then in humans, you can feed a human 800 calories a day of carefully selected nutrients. They are low in protein, they are low in added sugar, they're reasonably high in complex carbohydrates and fats. And you can get a metabolic response pretty close to water fasting while you're mimicking total fasting, but you're actually eating a very small breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This is all actually packaged and commercially available. It's called Prolon, Prolon. It's an international company, and one that I use a lot in my clinic because of the heavy science, randomized studies. And now it's extending that if you're a woman with breast cancer getting chemotherapy during your chemo, the side effects are less, and the
Right.
chemo response to cancer is greater. You'll look for exciting data coming out about fasting mimicking Prolon diet and type 2 diabetes, and studies going on for early memory issues. So it's only 5 days. It can be done at home by most people. There are a few people, brittle diabetics, frail elderly, that shouldn't do it. The interesting thing, just to circle back, and what triggered me to bring that up, is in studies that have been done, randomized studies, the weight loss that might occur from the fasting mimicking Prolon diet is visceral fat, not muscle fat, not muscle weight. So that it seems to be a solution to the concern you have that with a drastic fast, you might also be losing, muscle protein, which for
Hmm.
many people may be adverse.
Right, right. And one question as far as fasting is concerned, because I'm a big fan of fasting, and I've always been. Although I've been questioning, as we all should as scientists. I've been questioning, also having listened to people that are not promoting fasting as much as others do. I've been thinking about the argument that the benefits of fasting come primarily because of calorie restriction. And so what are your thoughts on that? Because it's a pretty powerful argument, and it's hard to disentangle these two things.
Well, I think if you're talking a water fast, there's no doubt that's the ultimate calorie restriction. Or
Hmm.
some of the centers, even in Germany, will let you have 250 calories a day of
Yeah.
broth and a little bit of vegetables. So you're still very calorie restricted.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the fasting mimicking diet,
Hmm.
this commercially available program, is Dr. Longo, I don't know if he patented the term, but he uses the term nutritechnology. This isn't you just go home and eat 800 calories of candy bars. This is, prepackaged breakfast, lunch, dinner in a box. And it is there because of scientific studies that the two pathways that most trigger aging and cell injury are pathways triggered by added sugar and pathways triggered by high protein diets, particularly the amino acid methionine and the amino acid tryptophan.
Hmm.
So the foods that are in there are purposely selected to be without added sugar. And it is for 5 days a low protein diet, specifically methionine and tryptophan. It is a plant-based 5-day diet, which is where I got attracted to it,
Hmm.
except for a small amount of honey and a nut bar. There's a little honey that some people argue is plant-based or not plant-based.
Yeah.
But at any rate, there we're talking not, could you just eat 800 calories a day of any type or 800 calories a day of this predetermined nutritechnology diet? And the data is suggesting it's the latter argument. It's the specific constitution of the 800 calories that is the magic.
That that would make sense. That would make sense actually. How the diet is composed, the composition actually matters, not just especially for long-term health, right? Because the ultimate claim when we say what matters is calorie restriction is you eat like I don't know, literally candy bars or junk food. Just reduce your calories and try to lose weight for a certain period of time and see what happens. Like you might lose weight, but does that mean necessarily you're gonna become healthy? Not so sure about that.
I agree. I
Okay,
agree.
yeah. I have another question for you. How much time have we left? What would you say?
We can go about 15 more minutes.
Okay, that's perfect. You mentioned that you're on a plant-based diet, and you oftentimes recommend the same thing for your patients. And I have listened to many people that are pro and against plant-based diets for various reasons, and we don't necessarily have to go into that in great depth. But what do you think about the idea that plant-based diets, and you might make this argument for pretty much every single diet out there, the benefit come primarily through the exclusion of ultra processed foods. And so, I mean, that's certainly one aspect because what all diets agree upon is that excluding processed foods is a very good idea. So, what are your
I,
thoughts? Are there any additional benefits?
yeah, well, that is an important point. If you
Right.
if you maybe ethical reasons, maybe religious reasons, you say I'm done with all animal foods from meats to eggs to dairy, and if you substitute frozen foods and box foods and canned foods and increasingly, there are a lot of vegan fast food options. You have helped the environment, you've helped the animals, you've done very little for your own health. There actually are studies, observational studies. There's a massive one from the Harvard School of Public Health, and they try and characterize food questionnaires as a unhealthy plant diet index or a healthy plant diet index.
Yeah.
Healthy would be eating vegetables, fruits,
Whole
grains,
foods,
and
basically. Yeah.
legumes. Largely could be in soups and salads and casseroles and bean tacos, but largely real food. And the difference is quite striking. There is an advantage. I think the study I'm thinking of was looking at cardiovascular disease specifically, and there actually was a harmful nature from switching from a standard diet to a highly processed techno
Yeah.
vegan diet.
Well,
So,
unsurprisingly, I would say, and that's also what I don't like about the vegan commercial products. You know, the
yeah,
vegan cheese, vegan meats, etc. Because it's like you don't necessarily do yourself any good by eating these foods. You know.
and they may prove beneficial for the environment. They obviously offer an opportunity to have a kinder attitude towards animal slaughter. But for the human, we may have no choice because the meat industry is, at least in the United States, under incredible attack from the green energy movement that's very popular right now.
Oh yeah.
And there will be pushback. The meat industry is a large, vocal, and wealthy industry, but it is, you won't find me other than once a year eating a really junky plant-based burger. You can make your own out of black beans, oatmeal, and quinoa or some such substitute. But yeah, that is a pitfall. I mean, there are pitfalls in plant-based diets. However, the advantage is, the excess in vitamins, excess in minerals, excess in fiber, excess in, we call them phytonutrients, plant-based nutrients, carotenoids, that come from eating just out of 4 simple food groups. Lots of fruits, whole fruits, lots of vegetables, every kind, lots of whole grains, unless, of course, you're celiac, and then you got to shift to gluten-free, and lots of legumes. It may easily be argued the healthiest food group in the world are the peas, the beans, the lentils. Many studies have shown that the common thread in a lot of longevity areas of the world and diets and elderly, and there's where you're going to get your protein in the elderly, is making sure there's, if you're having a salad, you should be having chickpeas or black beans or kidney beans or white cannellini beans, and maybe a few sesame seeds and sunflower seeds, and make it crunchy, make it fiber, make it protein rich. But it's inarguable that the weight of the data between a all junk diet, an all meat diet, a largely meat diet, or an all plant-based diet with a couple vitamins favors the scientific advantage for reducing heart disease risk, obesity risk, type 2 diabetes risk, increasing interest in data, improving cognitive function or avoiding loss of memory, cancer risk, certainly breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer. I mean, the relationship between processed meats and colon cancer is very high. And there's a spike going on in colon cancer in younger adults. So shifting away to saying goodbye bacon, goodbye hot dog, goodbye sausage, goodbye pepperoni. I mean, these are foods people love.
Yeah.
And maybe the plant-based substitutes will keep the cancer risk down, but they're not going to help the overall health.
Right. So I think that's a very important thing to point out, that what we just did is basically that avoiding, focusing on a whole foods approach is the most important thing here. And with that said, I want to ask you another questions on the animal food side of the equation, because undoubtedly you could make the same case for animal foods as we just did for plant foods. You might say, look, there is harmful qualities to processed animal foods, and undoubtedly there are. As we have evidence showing that processed plant diets don't produce benefit, and so don't do processed animal foods. Certainly that's the case. And so what would you say, I think the evidence also supports that, because as far as I can remember, there's evidence in people who buy their food in whole food stores, and there is no big harm to including animal foods because these people are health conscious. So what is your thought? What are your thoughts on a reasonably whole foods diet that includes whole foods plants as well as whole foods animal foods?
Yeah. There's a colleague of mine that uses the term be a qualitarian, pick quality choices, not easy to grab processed junk choices. And it undoubtedly applies to animal foods. I mean, there's multiple studies that the greatest risk of type 2 diabetes, cancer, heart disease, cognitive impairment is processed red meats, hot dog,
Right.
pepperoni, bacon, sausage. Red meats in many studies also show up, but often statistically far less potent than processed red meats. There are a few things in meats that are going to be there, whether they're processed or not. Meats can have a high amount of saturated fat, depending on how the animal was raised and the cut of the meat. And generally, there is always a debate in nutrition, but the vast majority of the world feels high saturated fat diets are likely to raise your LDL cholesterol and, if sustained long enough, raise your risk for atherosclerotic heart disease. You can't get away from red meat having a high content of L-carnitine, an amino acid. And in the last dozen years at the Cleveland Clinic and now worldwide, L-carnitine in red meat can lead to the creation of a metabolite called TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, and that can potentially be associated with multiple adverse diseases, probably actually causes them. That may be questionable. There's a pathway you can read about called New5GC, but there is a theory and observation that this is a compound in red meat. It's just innate and it's not present in the human body. We have a compound called New5AC in the human body, and there may be an immunologic reaction that actually affects our arteries, causes a food-based vasculitis. So it's an interesting topic. And, there may be meats engineered that have low carnitine, low New5GC, and there might be a food engineering response to all this. I can see that happening. But so, I'll go back again. Any of the students listening, go study Dr. Walter Longo, Longo, PhD. He has books in Italian, books in English, wide-selling nutrition books, and a great website himself. I think it's drwalterlongo.com, if I remember. But his own personal recommendation in diet is, of the 21 meals a week many people eat, 3 times 7, 19 are whole food, plant-based, often featuring a little pasta, a little lentils, a little salad, beans. And 2 meals a week he eats fatty fish like a salmon. I choose not to eat fatty fish, but it's pretty hard to argue with people that say, a couple meals a week I eat sardine, herring, mackerel, salmon for its omega-3 content. There are other ways to get omega-3, but many people rely on that. So but if you think of that ratio, that's about less than 10% of the meals a week coming from animal foods and 90% coming from plant-based, as a recommendation from somebody who's he's the most highly funded nutrition researcher in the United States. So pretty authentic guy. You might hear a little puppy in the background saying, "Dad, you've been gone so long. Let's play."
Well, we'll wrap up soon. I appreciate that perspective, and we could discuss these things in greater detail, but unfortunately we don't have enough time. Maybe we'll do another part where we can dive deeper into this whole issue, because, I follow many guys that are pro-animal based or pro-animal foods and against animal food, so I'd really love to, and I was very interested to get your perspective on that topic, and
the debate that's hard is the human body, we know, can adapt to so many different versions of diet. I mean, you can grow up and have children on a fast food diet.
Yeah, sure.
So the debate becomes, risk of cancer, risk of diabetes, risk of obesity, risk of heart disease, risk of dementia.
I think though, when we look at evidence that suggests that, like, let's say, unprocessed animal foods are harmful, we have to always keep in mind that there certainly is a healthy user bias at play, right? So that those who eat more plants are generally more interested in health, because that's what's been recommended for a long time, right? So they exercise more, they may be less smokers, etc.
Right. That's why these are largely big observational studies done by food questionnaires. Like the Harvard School of Public Health has so many publications, but every 4 years they go back and ask the questions again and adjust. So, if you were a meat eater in 1988 and nobody ever came back to find out you had adopted a vegan diet, you'd be classified as a meat eater. They do better than average work, but you'll see many studies. We collected data in 1988, and in 2020, 20, we counted up how many deaths and diabetes. But, it's not invaluable data, but it
No,
has
no.
a lot of potential for flaws.
Yeah.
Because we rarely, I mean, there's a study going on now in Spain of 1,000 heart patients randomized to 2 different healthy diets. There was the famous study called Predimed about 10 years ago with 7,000 patients. Those are impossible to do in terms of actually randomizing diets and expecting people to stick to different diets for years. You're never going to get the 100,000 patient randomized study. So we're just going to observe and try and see what's consistent with the science. Yeah.
It's always that these things have to be kept in mind,
Right.
because and if we like create hypotheses, then it's if possible to test them in randomized controlled trials. But I think if we focus on these recommendations, then there is little that we can do wrong, especially when paying attention to nutritional adequacies. And I'm glad that you're at least one of these vegan folks that promote supplementing with those nutrients that are missing in a whole foods plant-based diet, even if it's well constructed.
I agree. But, when I check vitamin levels in my non-vegan patients that eat a spectrum of clean to processed, I find lots of nutritional deficiencies in humans in general, which is, it's very controversial. But even in the last week or two, a study came out that regular use of a multivitamin and multimineral lowers your risk of developing cognitive impairment. Now, it's an observation study, and there are, do you get enough selenium? Do you get enough iodine? Do you get enough magnesium? Do you get enough boron? Do you get enough copper, zinc?
Yeah.
Who knows from your diet? Maybe you're tracking, maybe you're just eating, but that's why I don't take a multivitamin, multimineral every day. I take about 3 times a week just to fill, those potential pockets without flooding the body excessively. But
I think that's
been asking. Actually, I could not have asked the questions in medical school that you're asking. So I give you praise and accolades, and you're on your way to a great future.
Hey, thank you very much. It's
been
it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I really enjoy asking like medical doctors and like people who are what would you say? They have great knowledge base, let's say, and they're pretty knowledgeable about their field. And so that's why I like doing these conversations with people and to ask different questions. So I appreciate your time. Thanks a lot for coming on. Please tell people where they can find you if they're interested to follow you.
Sure. I am a practicing physician in the United States in a city called Detroit, Michigan, the automotive capital of the world, Ford Motor, General Motors, and the rest. I do see people all over the world. I had patients yesterday in Melbourne, Australia, and Nairobi, Kenya, but largely they're in the United States. And I'm at a website, drjoelkahn.com, drjoelkahn.com, and take you to my clinic. I also have a weekly podcast, which is short and sweet like this, and you can find it from drjoelkahn.com. I've written a bunch of books. If you want to learn a little more of the science of plant-based eating, the Plant-Based Solution hopefully is available in English in Germany. I'm not aware of there being a German version.
Well, should be.
Yeah. All right. Well,
social media platforms, you're on Instagram? Anything else?
I'm a little bit controversial. So I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and I'm hard to find.
Hey, I like that, by the way. We didn't talk about it, but that's why I wanted to have you on. That's another reason why I wanted to have you on.
I'm not a radical, but I have been suppressed by big tech.
Yeah.
In fact, I can say proudly I've been kicked off Twitter for life.
Good for you, man.
By talking about science that apparently big tech monitors don't enjoy.
Yeah.
In fact, I quoted the leading expert in infectious disease this week on LinkedIn, and I got slapped with a reprimand. I quoted, a professor who's chairman of the Division of Infectious Disease.
Man, it's absolutely preposterous. It's absolutely preposterous what's going on. I've been shadow banned. So many people have been thrown off social media.
On Instagram, I'm heavily shadow banned. It's DRJKAHN, Dr. J. Kahn. But good luck finding me, even though I post, several times every day.
Right, right. Hey, yeah. Well, well, look, I think it's a good sign. Like, you've been thrown off Twitter. That's reason to believe you, because right now, I think that's the right way to look at things.
Uh, yeah, we have to speak up about an increasingly chaotic world.
No, yeah.
Respect
And I've been
on
quite surprised because you know what I found very last thing to close with. My observation was that those people, because I follow a whole bunch of people in the health space, and like those who question the, let's say, the plant-based narrative that's going on, like the animal folks, they're all have been very critical over the past couple of years, and almost
right.
every plant-based doctor person out there has been following the narrative. And so I've been extremely happy to see that there are people like you who are still standing up, even though they agree with one part of the narrative. So that means you're thinking for yourself. Many people can't do that.
Thank you. All right. Have a
All right.
wonderful day. Good
Have a
luck.
wonderful day. It's been great talking with you.
Bye bye.
Bye, Doc.